Migrating your public folders to SharePoint Online might feel like a daunting task, but it doesn't have to be. In this demo, we'll walk you through exactly how it's done, step by step. When you're migrating from Exchange Online to another completely different SaaS service, such as SharePoint Online, there's going to be challenges. So first and foremost, can you migrate the public folder hierarchy and leave that hierarchy intact in SharePoint Online? And can the messages come over with that itself? So when you have that figured out, the next step of this is regarding invalid characters. SharePoint Online has a number of characters that are invalid within a service, but when you're migrating data from an email system, emails from either public folders names themselves or the actual file names when you're migrating this. So usually that's the subject, are always riddled with invalid characters. So those have to be addressed. Then you also can have the issue of large public folders. So public folders that are okay in Exchange Online, but are not okay in SharePoint Online. How do you deal with those? Can you migrate data in that folder in an acceptable way so that the content's still there and still visible to the end user while satisfying SharePoint's requirements? Then there's metadata. Can you bring over certain properties in the messages that you're migrating and have that information in separate SharePoint columns, such as like to, from, subject, whether or not it has attachments? Can you give them that kind of view that starts to give them the feel of working in an Outlook, but they're in SharePoint Online? And can you do all this prior to even clicking go on the migration? Can you optimize this enough so that you have the confidence that when you go to migrate, this data is going to migrate successfully over there? So when you have all that figured out, the next step from there is, do you have enough storage capacity within SharePoint Online? Is your SharePoint Online quota large enough to handle this? So if you've got that figured out, there's also possibility of compatibility with third-party plugins. So there are some SharePoint Online kind of plugins for Outlook that will file messages for a user specifically to a SharePoint Online site. Will this also be able to work with that? And then when you have all this done, securing the data that was migrated with a post-migration data protection plan. The first step in this type of migration is to crawl your public folders. So whether that's Exchange on-premise or Exchange Online. Here in the ExchangeSavvy public folder connector is the Browse and Report tab. So in this section is where I can view the crawled public folder data. So if I click on all public folders or expand it here, I can see the folder structure that I've crawled. I can also see in the weight column the number of items that are in those folders. And at the bottom left-hand corner, I can filter this by year. So if I want to see everything that was in here from 2023, I can click this and it changes your view. Or I can go back to all. And if I'm more concerned about seeing the data size instead of item count, I can switch that. And I can view that here and view everything by data size. So everything in here is in the Migrator SQLite database and cataloged this way. And this sets the foundation for how we're going to go through and resolve potential conflicts that you can have with SharePoint Online as part of this migration type. The next step is to identify and split any large public folders that you may have in your public folder hierarchy. To do this, we go to the destination SharePoint folder settings. In here, there are two values that matter when it comes to splitting your public folders. The first one being the maximum items per public folder, and the other one being the maximum public folder size in gigabytes. So there is a list view threshold in SharePoint Online of 5,000 items in a folder. So we have it set to 4,900 here. So if you have more than 4,900 items, it's going to do a folder split based on that. We also have it set to, in this case, 20 gigabytes for a max size for a folder. You can set this to whatever you want. You can set it lower, whatever works for you. But a folder can meet one or both of these requirements to be split. And then the other setting that we have here is a verbose naming for files. This just gives you additional information in the file name for the message when we migrate it. So instead of just being the subject as the file name, it can add the data the message was received and from. And some third-party Outlook plugins will do this when it files messages. So this just helps make it similar to what you would see in that scenario. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and run the split process. So I go to the Run tab, I'll click on Start Crawl, and split public folders. So you'll get confirmation that you want to do this. And what happens is that if any folder meets a requirement to be split based on those previous settings, it's going to display it here. So in this case, gives you the whole folder path, gives you how many items are in that direct folder. So not subfolders, the folder itself, and the size. So we can see that the items in here are over 5,000. So it's going to split it this way. I can either export this to a file and review later and then come back and rerun this, or I can confirm the split. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm it here. And the split's done. So I'll go back to the Browser Report tab, click on Refresh, go to Marketing, and then go to New Content. Now you're going to see in here, there's a new folder name called New Content, and then there's a date range in here. So it's year, month, day to year, month, day. What it does when you do a split is it keeps all the data from today going back to the point of the split. So in my case, the 4,900 or so items are going to stay in the original folder when it migrates. Anything older is going to be in this new split folder that it created. That's now a subfolder of the folder that was being split. And what this date range has in here is the date range of the oldest and newest item that are in this folder. So in this case, it just happens to be the same date, but in most cases, you'll see it with a larger date range here. Now you may ask what happens if it has to do multiple splits. It's like 15,000 items. Well, you're going to get another subfolder here that'll be that date range. So everything chronologically in order. So if a user has to go back and see what's in that folder, as long as they know kind of the date range they're looking for, they'll know what subfolder to click in. The other thing to mention here too is that all of this is in the Migrator SQLite database. So nothing changed on the source public folders, but when we go to migrate, this is how it's going to migrate that data over in this kind of view. So you can expect to see this folder over on SharePoint Online. In step 3, we work on the invalid characters. Back in the public folder connector, we go to the invalid character settings. So in here, you'll see a list of invalid characters and then the option to replace it with a valid character, which you can see on the right-hand side. So you can choose the defaults that we have for you here. You can also swap out these characters with another character of your choice. And then once you have this done, what'll happen is in line with the migration, if we encounter one of these characters, it will automatically replace it with the character you have set here, making it valid as you're migrating it. So you don't have to clean up any data on the public folder side. It's doing it in lieu of the migration over to SharePoint Online. Next, we want to determine what columns and metadata we want to see on the SharePoint Online side. To do this, click on Column Metadata Settings. From here, you can see the optional columns to choose from, which are all email metadata type columns, such as from, to, CC, etc. You can choose which ones apply to your migration, or in this case, select all of them that are available to you. Now, when the migrator goes to create these columns for the first time in any of the SharePoint sites, it will look to see if they already exist. And if they already exist, and they're from a common Outlook plugin that files messages from Outlook to SharePoint Online, it will default to using its format, its column format, versus creating one from here. This way, whether you're migrating data from public folders using the public folder connector, or you're filing messages from that Outlook plugin, they'll all go to the same place and populate the same metadata fields. Next, we move on to the migration. Back in the public folder connector, I have a couple mappings configured for this migration demo. And the mappings are where the true flexibility and power comes in for the public folder connector to help you migrate any way you see fit. So here in the first mapping, you can see the options that are available. So I'm going to focus on the destination site URL first. So this is the SharePoint site location that you want to migrate to for this particular mapping. So the site is after sites. This happens to be a team site, and this one's called PFC Site 1. If I don't put anything after this, everything's going to migrate to the default document library of that site, which is typically called Documents. But if you created your own document library, in this case, I called it Correspondence, it's going to migrate directly to that document library specifically. And then next, you have the option of specifying the folder path within that particular site location above. So if you don't put anything in here, it's going to end up in the root of the correspondence document library. However, if you do put something here, it allows you for this mapping to tell it to migrate all the public folders to that specific folder location within this document library called correspondence. In this case, I'm just going to keep it empty. And then the include public folders is where you tell it what public folders you want to migrate to this particular document library. In this case, I have a folder called offices. And there's an asterisk after it because if I want the subfolders to come along with it, I just simply put the asterisk there or the star. Now you can also select other public folders here too if you wanted to. I just have one, but you can list multiple paths here separately within the same mapping, or you can have separate mappings for them. However, whatever works for you. And then the other option here was to suppress the top level public folder. So sometimes you might create a site that is the same name as the top level public folder you're migrating. So maybe I created a site called offices, or maybe the document library called offices. I don't want to migrate it where the first folder is called offices. So if I don't want that to happen, it will not write this folder called offices. It'll start migrating the data within it into the root of correspondence, but then it'll also start writing all the subfolders over as well. So then that way it gives you more of a cleaner look. But again, it's a personal option based on whatever is going to suit your migration best. Now, another powerful feature of this migration solution is in the public folder path itself. So in this case, I said earlier, we're going to migrate offices and all subfolders. But what if there's a specific folder within here I want to migrate? So I'll call it folder 1, folder 2, folder 3. And then I want everything in folder 3. So you would think by default, when we migrate this, it's going to end up being offices, folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, and then all the content. But that's not how it works here. What happens is that it will start with this folder. So if I go to migrate it with the way it's selected right now, with this option selected, it will migrate all the content in folder 3 directly to the root of correspondence, and then any subfolders and content below that will be written. So there's a number of reasons for doing this. One, it's a cleaner look. You don't have to bring over all the folders, especially if you're going to be splitting to multiple different SharePoint Online sites. And then two, it's another way to limit the possibility of running into the SharePoint Online 400 character URL limit. So by doing this, we're removing all of this from the URL, so it doesn't need to be there. And again, it allows for a more cleaner looking migration doing it that way. But in this case, for this migration demo, again, we're just going to migrate from a root folder called offices and its subfolders. One other point to make here is that in the mappings you can see here, they're going to two different SharePoint Online sites. So this first one for the offices folder is going to PFC site 1. I have another one going to PFC site 2. So these are currently empty sites, which I'll go ahead and show you here. Here's a look at PFC site 1. This is the correspondence document library. And then here's the documents, but we're going to go to correspondence. And then here's the PFC site 2. So same setup. They're both empty. You can see that the columns listed here are just the default columns. Nothing's been added yet. So this is prior to the migration. To make things easier, we do allow you to configure your mappings in a CSV file and then import them into the tool here. So if you want to have them all created in advance, or maybe split this up into batches, you can do that and simply just load the mapping CSV file into the tool and then click go for the migration. Here on the Run tab is where you kick off the migration. So on the far right-hand side, you'll see a value for threads set to 6. This is the number of public folders that can be processed simultaneously during the migration. It doesn't have to stay this way though. So as you're running the migration, if you feel like you can process more, you can simply increase it while the migration's running. You can also decrease it as well. The number of threads is based on a couple of factors. On the source side, if it's Exchange Online public folders, it's determined by the number of impersonation accounts you have added to the migrator. So the more you have, the more you can add from a thread count perspective. From the destination, being SharePoint Online, it's based on the number of Entra ID applications you've provisioned for the migration. So the more you've configured, the more threads you can run simultaneously. If you do not have enough and you run too many threads, you will see those threads get marked for throttling detection during the migration, in which you'll see a 5-minute countdown on the thread. So if you're seeing that, you know you're running too many threads. You either need to dial it down on the thread count, or you need to go and provision more either intra-ID applications for the SharePoint side or more impersonation accounts for the Exchange Online public folder side. To kick off the migration, we're going to click on Start Crawl and then Migrate Public Folders. And you'll see that it'll start to read the folders at first. And it's only 2 threads because those are the root level folders. It'll start to read to items as items scanned. And then as items are migrating, you'll see items extracted begin to increment as well. And there you go. Those are items migrating over. So while the migration's running, I'm going to go to PFC Site 1. I'm going to refresh this. So you can see now that we have subfolders here. This is the one for Offices, and there was no data in Offices. But if you recall, I set it so that it didn't migrate the actual Offices folder first. It left that off. But you can also see columns are starting to show up. So I'm going to go into the Chicago folder. And now you can see some of the metadata. So you can see the file name here, which is the subject. In my case, I did this verbose naming option. So it added the receive date and time, the user sending the message, and the subject name are in the message. You don't have to do this. It's just a checkbox option. If you don't check it, it's just going to be the subject name, which you can see here on the subject column. So you can see all the metadata that's coming over in this case. So I have them all selected. For the has attachments, this one will show a check mark if there's an attachment in the message. So you can see the data that's coming over live right now as I'm sitting here and populating it. So I'm going to go with the PFC Site 2. You can also see here that this also has columns and data migrating to it. So a completely different SharePoint Online site also has data coming over. And you can see that listed here. And again, I have all the columns that are selected. And again, you can mess with these views if you want, the column views, reorder them however you see fit. That's completely up to you. But we're migrating to both of them at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and click over to the migrator, and you can see that we're migrating data. So the item scan is always going to go ahead of extracted, because it reads at sometimes between 50 to 200 messages at a time from the source public folders and then begins migrating them to SharePoint Online. So one of the things to point out while this is migrating is that based on your configuration, most customers can average anywhere between 600,000 messages to 1 million messages in a given 24-hour period. Now, again, you can go higher than that. It just depends on what you're able to provision, either from a impersonation account side in the public folders or on the Entra ID application side for SharePoint Online. But the more resources you have, the more you can throw at this. And of course, the server resources you have for running the tool. I mean, the more resources you have available, the faster you're going to be able to go as well. So this is a live migration going into SharePoint Online. I'm going to step away for a moment, and then we're going to come back when the migration's finished. So the migration's completed. I do have a few errors. So what I'm going to do is run another process, which is the reprocess folders items with errors. So this reattempts the items or folders that failed. In this case, it's just 3 items. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and see if we can get those migrated over. And I'll know based on the items extracted. And there we go. They're migrated. So what I'm going to do is go to the Browser Report tab, click on Refresh. And you can see here, I got the marketing folder, and you'll see the processing state. So when it's migrating, it will mark them in here as migrated. So you can refresh during the migration and see which items or folders it's migrated and which ones it hasn't. One of the other things we do with the migration is there's full chain of custody tracking. So you can click on any item. I'll click on this one, and you'll see the statistics of, that item's received date, size, message class, unique IDs. But if you click on chain of custody, we'll also track when the item was migrated, the date and time it actually migrated, and where it's at in the destination. So you get the ID information. If we had an item where we run multiple delta syncs with this, and let's say the item changed, like it was modified on the source, and again, this would typically be like a contact or calendar item or even a task, it would show updated in here. You'd get another entry and it would be migrated again, replacing the old version of it. Again, fully able to handle any kind of modification that happens on the source side. So we have all the statistics. So everything's migrated over. And I'm also going to show you the folder that was split. So it was this new content folder. And here's the split folder. So if I expand this, click on it, these are the other items that were migrated over that were outside of the maximum value we had set, which was 4,900 items in the original folder. So I created that folder and migrated it over to SharePoint Online. So I'm going to also go and show you what it looks like on the SharePoint side. So here's the SharePoint site where we migrated that split public folder. So I'll click on New Content. Then here's that split folder that I showed you in the Browse and Report tab of the migrator. And then here's the items that were migrated in it. You'll also notice that some of them have attachments here by the check mark under the Has Attachments column. And if I click on this one that has attachments, you can see the attachment name. You can read the text that's in it, just a plain text view of it. If you want to go ahead and open this within Outlook, simply download it. And then you can click on it, and then it opens up in Outlook. From here, you can open the attachment, read it, and reply to it if you want, and then work with it from Outlook from there. But as you can see, it's pretty easy to go through, open, view these messages, find what you need by looking at the metadata or the message name itself, and then opening it in Outlook, and then replying to it or forwarding it to it, whatever you need to do with that message from here while it's sitting in SharePoint. Here are some key takeaways from the demo. First, there's no need to lock or freeze the source public folders during your migration. It's built so that it allows your users to continue to use public folders day in, day out. This is unlike typical processes that Microsoft uses to freeze public folders in order to do the migration. That's not how this tool works. This tool allows you to keep using it. So it has the added benefit of being able to seed your migration early, keep up with updates, and then do the cutover. So again, a lot more friendly to your end users, and the migrator just takes care of any changes along the way. Second, the public folder splits that happen within this migrator are not being done on the source public folders. The source public folder that was split remains the way it was, unsplit. The split happens within the migrator, and then it's migrated with the split in place. We also automatically filter for invalid characters. So as you saw during the demo, we identify all the different types of invalid characters you can run across in SharePoint and have alternative characters that are valid that can replace them during the migration. This prevents you from having to do cleanup prior to the migration in order to make sure it's successful. And then to be able to choose email type SharePoint Online columns for metadata. So you saw that you can select up to 12 different columns from to to from, has attachments, whatever fits your migration scenario. And then that metadata will come along during the migration. We also, within the tool, are able to support Delta Sync. So it's a full synchronization. What that means is that any changes that happen from the last migration sync you run will be brought over to the destination. So in this case, SharePoint. So if a user adds new data, like new data comes in, they move content, they rename folders, they move folders, they copy folders, they even do deletions. All of those changes will be replicated over to the SharePoint side each time you run a sync. So the way to think about it is that we're always copying the state of the public folders at that point in time to SharePoint Online, the target, every time for those folders. So again, like I mentioned before, this allows you to seed everything in advance and then just run Delta syncs, which again are much quicker to handle any changes until you're ready for the day to do the cutover. And then having a SharePoint Online view that looks similar to an email client like Outlook. You have the metadata, you have the columns, you can use them for search reasons, you can sort by them, in order to find what you need in the folder structure that's familiar to them from the public folders. So what if you could slash the storage your migrated public folders consume in SharePoint Online and stop paying Microsoft for costly storage increases without losing a single second of access to your data? In an upcoming video, I'll show you exactly how to do that using our data protection service. If you've already migrated your public folders to SharePoint Online, this one's for you. You'll walk away knowing how to cut storage costs, dodge unnecessary Microsoft fees, and keep your data fully protected and always accessible, all at the same time. You won't want to miss it.